It's January 22nd, 2005, and Boston wakes up to a grey sky. People check the weather forecast on their kitchen radios while pouring coffee. The meteorologists had warned them. A winter storm was coming, but winter storms always come to New England. They come every year. This one, though, was going to be different, and nobody quite understood how different until it was too late. This is the story of the January 2005 blizzard that buried Boston and the Northeast, a storm so severe that it would reset what an entire region thought was possible in a single winter day. If you love stories of survival, community, and how ordinary people face extraordinary weather, please subscribe. Now, let's go back to that morning. Mark was a mailman in Brookline, Massachusetts. He'd been delivering mail through New England winters for 15 years. He knew what snow looked like. He knew the sound of shovels scraping driveways at dawn. His wife, Sarah, had made him promise to stay home if things got bad. But Mark was skeptical. He'd seen plenty of winter storms. What made this one special? Across the city, in a small apartment near the Boston Commons, Elena was a social worker. She'd grown up in New Jersey but had made Boston her home for the last 7 years. That Saturday morning, she looked out her window at the thick clouds rolling in from the west. The wind was already picking up. The news anchors were calling it a nor'easter, the kind of coastal storm that could dump heavy snow and create dangerous conditions along the Atlantic seaboard. Elena had heard it before. She'd survived it before. She went about her day in Providence, Rhode Island, just 40 minutes south. Tom was a school custodian. His job was to know the weather. If the roads got bad, the superintendent would call him before dawn to decide whether to cancel school. Tom had a portable radio in his kitchen, always tuned to the National Weather Service. He listened to the marine forecast, the wind advisories, the winter storm warnings. By mid-morning, the tone of the forecasters was changing. Their voices carried a different weight. They were using words like historic and dangerous and life-threatening. Tom felt something shift in his chest. The ordinary world was still spinning. People were still going to work. Kids were still going to school, but the sky was darkening. The wind was beginning to howl. By noon, the snow was falling so thick you couldn't see across the street. Not wet snow. Not the kind that compacts and becomes manageable. This was powder, fine, dry, Arctic powder that the wind caught and threw sideways with tremendous force. The visibility dropped to less than a quarter mile, then to 100 feet. The National Weather Service issued a blizzard warning, winds gusting up to 50 miles per hour, whiteout conditions, hazardous travel. Mark had decided to go to work. He'd put on his heavy coat, his gloves, his boots. He told Sarah not to worry. The mail had to get through, but by 12:30, his supervisor called him. "Get back here, now!" Mark turned his truck around. The roads were already becoming treacherous. Cars that had been on the highway just an hour earlier were now sliding sideways, jackknifing, creating a chain reaction of accidents. Emergency rooms across New England began filling up. Tow trucks couldn't keep up with the calls. By 1 p.m., the power started to fail, not everywhere at once. It was patchwork at first. A neighborhood in Worcester went dark, then another in Springfield. Trees, weighted down with ice and snow, snapped and fell across power lines. The electrical grid, that invisible system that keeps everything running, began to fail under the weight of the storm. People who had been watching the weather on television suddenly lost their picture. The hum of heaters cut off. Families gathered blankets. Some didn't understand yet how long they'd need them. By 2 p.m., public transportation was shutting down. The MBTA, Boston's subway and bus system, suspended service. Trains that were already in the tunnels had to be evacuated slowly, carefully, one passenger at a time. People who had been commuting home from work found themselves stranded downtown, in train stations, in bus terminals. The city's arteries were clogging. The flow of people and resources that kept Boston functioning was seizing up. Elena was stuck at her office. The social services building where she worked was on Newbury Street. She'd thought she'd leave early, but the snow was falling so fast, the wind was so strong, that her supervisor made everyone stay put. "We'll ride this out here," the supervisor said. "It's not safe to be outside." Elena sat by the window and watched the city disappear. The street below was becoming a canyon of white, cars abandoned in the middle of the road, no one moving, just snow and wind and a kind of terrible silence. By 3 p.m., the snow had already accumulated to 8 inches. By 4 p.m., It was 14 inches. The standard for a blizzard is 35 miles per hour winds and 1/4 mile visibility, conditions that make travel dangerous. This storm was exceeding those benchmarks and accelerating. Wind gusts were hitting 50, then 55, then pushing towards 60 miles per hour. The coastal flood advisory became a coastal flood warning. Waves were expected to reach dangerous heights. Harbor areas were flooding. Roads near the coast were becoming impassable. Tom had made the call at 3:30 p.m. School was cancelled. Parents needed to come pick up their kids immediately before the roads became completely blocked. But by the time families started leaving the school parking lot, it was already too late for some. One father, driving a sedan on the secondary roads near Providence, felt his car begin to slide. He pumped the brakes. Nothing. The car drifted sideways into a snowbank. He tried to back out. The wheels just spun. He was stuck. The snow was piling up around the doors. The wind was rocking the car. He called 911. The operator told him that all available resources were responding to accidents across the state. "Stay in your vehicle," the operator said. "Keep your engine running. Help will come." It took 50 minutes. By 5 p.m., the sky had the color of lead. The snow had reached 22 inches. The wind was relentless. Drifts were forming 8, 10, 12 feet high in some places. The highways were parking lots. There were over 300 accidents reported in Massachusetts alone. The Department of Transportation made a decision. They shut down I-93. The main north-south artery through New England closed. Not recommended to avoid. Not suggested as dangerous. Closed. Nightfall came at 5:30 p.m., but it came early that day because the sky was so dark with snow. It felt like midnight by 5 o'clock. The temperature was dropping. The wind was still fierce. And now in the darkness, with the power out in many neighborhoods, the storm became something else. It became primal. It became the kind of cold and dark that human beings aren't meant to experience alone. Mark had made it home. Sarah met him at the door and held him. They had heat. They had a fireplace. They had blankets and food, but they also had responsibility. Mark's mother lived 3 blocks away, in a house that depended on electric heat. He looked at his wife. "I need to check on her," he said. Sarah grabbed his arm. "It's not safe." "I know," Mark said. "But she's my mother." He put on his coat again. He stepped out into the night. The wind hit him like a physical force. The snow was so thick that he could barely see his own feet. He walked with his hand on the fence, using it as a guide. His face was numb within a minute. The snow was getting into his eyes, his nose, his mouth. His breath was freezing on his scarf. It was 43 degrees below zero with the wind chill. To be outside in it was dangerous, very dangerous. Mark kept walking. Eleanor was still at the office. The building had backup generators, so she had light, but the heating system was struggling. The temperature inside was dropping to the low 50s. Around her, co-workers were gathering blankets, pulling furniture closer together, trying to conserve warmth. Someone had brought a radio with a battery. The news was grim. "All highways are now closed," the meteorologist said. "Do not travel. Conditions are life-threatening. Anyone caught outside in these conditions could succumb to hypothermia in minutes." Eleanor felt the weight of those words. Minutes, not hours. Minutes. In Tom's house in Providence, the power was still on, but it was flickering. The wind outside was shaking the house. His daughter, 7 years old, was scared. She kept asking if they were going to be okay. Tom didn't know the answer. He told her yes, because that's what fathers say. He built a fort out of blankets in the living room. They sat together, and he told her stories about winter storms from his own childhood, stories where everyone made it through and laughed about it later. She fell asleep in his lap. Some people weren't so fortunate. A man named Robert, a long-haul trucker, had decided to push through. He'd been warned. The dispatcher had told him to pull over, to find shelter, to wait it out. But Robert was only 40 miles from Boston. He thought he could make it. By 8 p.m., he was on I-91 in Connecticut, and his truck had become a box of cold. His engine was still running. His heater was fighting a losing battle. The snow was piling up around his cab. He tried the radio. Nothing but static. The cell signal was gone. He was alone. The truck became his world, a metal shelter in an endless field of white. He knew somehow that if he left the truck, he would die. So he sat there, and he waited, and he prayed. By 10 p.m., the storm showed no signs of relenting. The wind was still gusting near 60 miles per hour. The snow was still falling at rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour in some areas. People who had no power were burning candles. Families were clustering together for warmth. In Boston, a shelter opened at the convention center. Emergency personnel were working round the clock. Rescue workers in all-terrain vehicles were going out into the white, following GPS and prayers, trying to find people trapped in cars on highways. Mark made it to his mother's house. He beat on her door. She opened it with joy and fear in her eyes. "Mark, thank God." She was cold. The electric heat had failed without backup. He carried her back to his house, half leading, half carrying her through the darkness and the wind. Every step was a battle. His face was frozen. His fingers had lost feeling, but they made it. When they got inside, Mark's mother cried. Not from sadness, from gratitude, from the simple miracle of being warm again. Morning came on January 23rd. The snow was still falling, though more lightly now. The wind had begun to shift. The worst was passing, but the damage was everywhere. Over 30 inches of snow had fallen across the region. In Boston, it was 22.3 inches, the second largest snowfall in the city's recorded history. Some areas had seen drifts of 4 and 5 feet tall. The roads were impassable. Most of the region was without power. Hospitals were working on backup generators. Schools were closed. Businesses were closed. The entire Northeast was paralyzed. But people did what people do. They got up, they looked at each other, and they helped. In Boston, neighbors helped neighbors shovel out. Strangers worked alongside strangers. A woman named Patricia, but who had lost power in her apartment building in Dorchester, remembered how the woman next door, someone she'd barely spoken to in 4 years of living there, brought her blankets and hot soup made on a camp stove. They sat together in the hallway where it was warmer, and they talked. They really talked for the first time. In Providence, Tom didn't wait for the town to clear the roads. He got his snowblower and began clearing his street, his driveway, and then the driveways of the elderly neighbors on either side. One of them was 86 years old. Her daughter had called from out of state, frantic, unable to reach her. Tom cleared her driveway, shoveled her walkway, and sat with her while she called her daughter back. The old woman cried. She told Tom he'd saved her life. He said he'd just done what needed doing. In the small towns surrounding Boston, churches opened their doors. The Universalist Church in Brookline became a warming center. People came in with snow in their hair and frost on their eyelashes. They drank hot coffee. They shared stories. A man named David, who worked as an electrician, remembered how the preacher had organized the men in the congregation to drive around the neighborhood, checking on the elderly and the infirm. They brought generators. They brought supplies. They brought the simple gift of showing up. The tow truck drivers kept working. Some had been out for 16, 18, 20 hours. Their fingers were numb. Their eyes were glazed with exhaustion, but they kept pulling cars out of snowbanks. Robert, the trucker, was rescued by one of them. A tow truck that found him using a thermal imaging camera that showed his truck in the white darkness. The driver, whose name was Frank, brought Robert back to the emergency shelter. Frank would work for another 8 hours before going home. People remember the moment when the storm finally broke. They remember the sun coming out that afternoon. They remember how the light on all that white snow was so bright it hurt your eyes. They remember going outside and seeing their street transformed into something unrecognizable, buried, changed, but not destroyed. Some people remember specific moments of fear, the moment they realized the power wasn't coming back on, the moment they understood that the main roads were impassable, the moment when their child asked, "Are we going to be okay?" And they had to choose whether to tell the truth or give comfort. But more than anything, people remember the moment the storm was over. They remember stepping outside on Sunday morning to a clear blue sky. They remember the silence, the absence of wind. They remember looking at the work ahead and not feeling alone. A neighborhood's worth of people with shovels, a community's worth of voices saying, "I'll help." The January 2005 blizzard changed how New England thought about winter. It changed policy. It changed preparedness. It changed how people kept their emergency supplies. In the weeks that followed, hardware stores sold out of generators, flashlights, batteries, and blankets. People who had never kept emergency food in the house began keeping it. Families who had never discussed where to meet in case of emergency started those conversations. The National Weather Service reviewed their forecasting, and while they had done an excellent job predicting the storm's severity, They realized that the public didn't always hear the warnings or didn't always take them seriously until it was too late. The storm wasn't just about snow. It wasn't just about wind and cold. It was about the moment when systems fail and people discover who they really are. It was about the neighbor you've ignored for 4 years bringing you soup. It was about the electrician from your church getting into his truck and checking on the elderly. It was about the simple, profound courage it takes to help someone when you yourself are cold and scared. Mark's mother lived with them for the next year, slowly recovering from the pneumonia she got from the cold. She survived that winter and many winters after. She always said that Mark's willingness to walk through the blizzard to get to her, that simple act of love, was the reason why. Mark said she was already warm when he found her. Her mother said no, it was the warmth of being loved that kept her alive. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your memories in the comments below. Have you lived through a winter storm like this? Have you seen your community come together? Share your story. Please like and subscribe.